Dan, Trevor, what's up, fellas?
How we're doing?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you on. So Dan and Trevor had me on their podcast twice already. I feel like a regular. So I felt like I wanted to have them on and learn more about kind of their business, what they do in the media business, talking about player development and on the baseball side. It's really great stuff if you haven't checked it out on YouTube. But let's get into that to start. So how did you guys get into this together?
Yeah, Dan and I go way back. We actually played. This gets lost in the Backside Groundballs lore a lot of times. Is Dan and I actually played high school baseball together. So we came full circle after both of our playing careers had ended, and we were both on staff at Goldie Beacom College. I actually played my last year of eligibility there, and Dan was there as a coach. And then we both kind of started our coaching career at that point at Goldie Beacom, and then really the business came about. So many people miss this as well, is in 2020 during COVID, Dan and I thought we were smart enough to talk into a podcast. So we started recording in our parents' basements and doing it remote, and just to kill the time of the pandemic when we were all on lockdown. And as we walked away from the coaching industry after a couple of years there, we kind of just tried to rekindle it, and it's expanded into what it is now, which is much more elaborate than just us sitting at a computer and having conversations.
Well, I started this podcast in 2020 as well. So I guess it's a pretty common theme. So when you started the podcast, right, what was it about initially? Has it morphed over time?
Oh my gosh, it's had I feel like it's changed every time. Me and Trevor, every couple of months for a while there, we were like, let's do this, let's do that. It started out actually, believe it or not, we used to talk about Major League Baseball. Because that's what we kind of both felt most comfortable with. Obviously, at the time, we were both huge Major League Baseball fans. We had the experience with the game, obviously playing and coaching in college. We felt like we could talk about it, evaluate what we saw. We felt like there wasn't a great space for that. Like, I'm not a big fan of a ton of the Major League Baseball content that's out there. So we were like, oh, let's get in with this. And then, it was kind of a thing during COVID. And then when we got into coaching, we weren't, when we started back up, we weren't doing it anymore. And then when we both left coaching the same year, we were like, let's start this back up. And then we were doing Major League Baseball again. And then after a while, we were like, man, we actually have connections in college baseball. Let's start doing college baseball stuff, which then we were kind of doing box score stuff and talking about the teams and following college baseball closer than we ever had, because we weren't in it finally. And then that morphed into, instead of people hearing us talk, wouldn't it be cool if we talked to coaches who actually were a lot smarter than us, and we have those connections? And I don't know if Trevor remembers the conversation. I remember where I was when we first had the idea of taking it on the road to campuses. I was actually driving on 85 in North Carolina, eating up me and Trevor like to eat up our road trips by talking on the phone to each other a lot of times. So we were doing that, and we started talking about what if we got to campuses, and that's kind of where it started to take off when we started to do that.
Okay. Well, there's so many directions to go from there. But I love that you guys were high school teammates, because, some of my best friends to this day, and I'm a lot older than you guys, are still my best friends from high school baseball. And the stories that get told have nothing to do with baseball. They have everything to do with the dumb shit that happened in the dugout, on the bus, just the best stuff. And it's not like, oh, we won or lost that, or I struck out there. It was like one of my favorite times was one of my best friends was playing third base in our county championship game, and he booted a ground ball basically. And, he said the sun was in his eyes, but we would always joke to this day that he was looking at his girlfriend. He was making googly eyes at her, right? So 30 years later, the joke is still oh, you were looking at Tara in the stands, and we all laugh about it, right? And we got beaten the county championship. That was a big deal. No one gives a shit about that anymore. They only care about hey, let's make fun of your friend, and we're 50 years old. So, you guys are what was it like playing together in high school?
Shoo, I'm sure so I was younger. So Dan's actually my brother's age. So Dan's 2 years older than me.
Okay.
So and this is not to give him his flowers too frequently. I don't feel like we are very affectionate a friendship, but he was a huge mentor to me as a younger guy playing up on varsity, and him being a senior and a leader. And I just learned so much from him in that time, and he kind of took me under his wing with a bunch of the other seniors, as a guy who obviously knew my brother as well, because they were in the same class. But that always stood out to me, and that's why when I circle back to wanting to play that last year eligibility at Goldie Beacom, it was so easy for me to reach out to Dan because, like, even though we hadn't talked other than just in passing over the couple of the years since he had graduated and went on to college, it was like one of those things where he was always like kind of a mentor to me, and it was just like easy to rekindle the relationship once that day came.
Gotcha. So the follow-up has to be, what was it like to play for Dan as a coach?
Oh, I was in such a weird scenario. It was great, but like I was like, I don't even know if I'd call myself as a player as much of a liaison, because I was so like old compared to the younger guys on the team, and I hung out with Dan and a lot of the older guys, and I felt like I was a part of the coaching staff, but they still gave me a uniform and let me like sometimes go out and play the field and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say I have a great experience, but he was always fine to me, and more fun than actually helping me do anything, because my successful days were over.
I was responsible for ending your pitching career, though. It just gets masked by the fact that COVID hit a couple days later, so no one knows it. But we needed Trevor was like a quasi. He's right. I mean, he wasn't, unfortunately, on that team. The team was pretty good, and Trevor at that point, he had dealt with, what did you have in the fall? You missed the entire fall with
like an enlarged spleen or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like it was so he missed the entire. So he was behind the 8 ball, and like he wasn't playing, but he was just such a great team guy. Which part of the thing I will say, like the story in that is that when I got to Goldie Beacom, we were in our 3rd year as a program. So they had 2 years, and so it was like a building. They were still building, and which they've built themselves into just like one of the best Division II programs on the East Coast, especially in that region. And so, you know, I spent my first year there, and we weren't very good, which, you know, we were fine, better, you know, what we were supposed to be expected. But I felt like we needed some culture guys, some guys who had, you know, won in college baseball, some guys who had success, who had been there and seen other programs and done it. And, you know, we brought in a guy named Brian McCourt, who I was teammates with at Shepherd University when I played, because I knew, you know, he was one of my best friends, still is. And so I knew that, like, he knew kind of how to go about things. He could show guys, just be a leader by example. And then Trevor, same thing. It was like, well, here's a guy who, you know, I've known him since high school. I know exactly who he is. I know exactly how he's going to be. He's only going to be a positive no matter what his role is. So he's, you know, that was a big reason for us, you know, getting him, even if his playing time wasn't great. But I will say we were losing a game pretty bad right before COVID hit and canceled the season, and we needed a sacrificial lamb, and we sent Trevor out there on the mound, and he blew out his arm, unfortunately. So even if the season had continued, I don't think Trevor
blew out my arm. I never went to the doctor.
Never went under the knife, just so hung it up.
Yeah,
But,
so my fault, maybe.
It was probably building up over sometimes. It just happened to be coincidental. But more seriously, like, so was the move out of coaching, like, were you guys kind of called to what you're doing? Or was it like dissatisfaction with the profession and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, let's go find something else to do? Or it was like, this thing is more like what I think I want to do? I mean, I'm just curious about your experiences as coaches, and ultimately I want to hear more about how that influences what you're doing now.
Yeah, I think it's actually weird that both of our scenarios are kind of similar, and I think it lends a lot to at least my perception on Dan, and I would assume Dan's perception on me. We both left because we cared more about our wives than our own careers, right? My wife was starting medical school at the time, and that's why we moved to North Carolina. And, you know, coaching industry and really most industries, it's all about who you know. And of course, I would have loved to move down to North Carolina and picked up the phone and Justin Hare wanted me on as a volunteer assistant. I would have walked right onto that field at Campbell, 10 minutes from my house the next day, but that wasn't an option for us in the card. So at that point, it was an easy decision and to just walk away. And then it was more of like, you know, what's our skill set? And we felt like we're pretty smart baseball people, or at least we knew a lot of people and asked the right questions. And that's what kind of pivoted us into the media side of things. Is it was just the best way to maximize both of our passions in life, which is our family and then obviously baseball.
Gotcha. So real life sort of was, you had to make some decisions about how to do what it is you wanted to do, but in a way that would work for everybody, which is real. I mean, listen, I was never a college coach. The closest thing that I ever was is I was a high school coach for 2 years. When I was going through my mental performance coach training, I was working on staff for free as a 40-something-year-old guy. I'm like, the guys I coach with, like I had one guy who's still a friend of mine who coached basketball. Like he worked like 80 hours a week and he's making like $3,000. And like he would drive kids home. It was a private school. He would drive them home. He'd text them. He'd be there at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning opening up the gym. And like he was like a father figure. Like he wasn't getting paid nearly enough to do what he was doing, but he did it because he loved it, right? It's a hard job, right? So like that lifestyle seems like it's not the easiest thing to be able to do. There's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made.
Yeah, when I try and like explain to my wife's family or anything like why I left or what it was like, it's not glamorous as people think. You know, most people who aren't huge sports fans or huge baseball fans, their perception of college athletics is like Alabama football, and that is the 0.0001% of what college athletics are for most people, right? The reality, a lot of times, the majority, they're not playing at that level, and not in that sport either, which has even more money than Alabama baseball or more funding or more perks, I guess you would say.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you know, the most glamorous. And that's not to say that I didn't like it and that's why I left, but it just came to a situation where it was like, well, I have a full-time job that's paying the bills. I have my passion, which is coaching college baseball, which I wasn't at a point in my career yet where it was enough to live off of, not even close. And then, you know, I had my wife, who I was getting ready to marry, who I liked spending time with and didn't get to see at all. And it was like, you know, because I'm leaving the house before 5 a.m. every day to get to my desk job to then go to practice. And then even when you get home after 7 o'clock, you know, if you're doing it the way that I wanted to do it, which was be all in, you're making recruiting calls, you're texting recruits, you're watching, you know, video of, you know, bullpens, you're game planning if you're in season, you're making practice plans.
Right.
So then I'm not even present at home. And it just got to a point where like seeing kind of the stress that it added to our relationship, it was like, well, I have to make a decision here. One of these things has to go. And it was like, which one? And it's like, well, not the person I'm going to marry for sure. And it's like, can I really justify cutting the job that is paying the bills for the job that wouldn't pay any bills, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just the unfortunate choice. And it took me, if I'm being honest, it took me a couple years to kind of get over it, right? Like I missed it for a long time and because I loved it and that's what I had wanted to do for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still, you know, I love what Trevor and I do now, but I don't know if a job will teach me as much about like hard work and like just kind of learning how to like take losses and still get out of bed and go to work the next day more than that job will. Like any job, I don't know if I could ever do something that's going to teach me kind of those life lessons.
Yeah. And I don't want to necessarily make this about sort of the things that I'm doing, but I think that's one of the things I try to tell kids, teach them, is that you need to have empathy for your coaches, right? Like they're working really hard. They got a family. If you're a head coach, you've got all sorts of responsibilities that you don't even see. And you don't like your coach and you don't like the way he's doing things and you don't like his decisions. But like there's a person behind that who's got a family to feed, right? So again, you know, you can feel however you want to feel as a player, but if you be the victim or you blame the coach for your lot in life, the only person you're hurting there is yourself, right? And when you hear a story like, you know, what you guys are saying, it's like, it's not an easy life. And I don't think kids realize that. They just think, well, coach is a great guy. He's a happy guy, right? He coaches baseball. What could be better? Well, your paycheck could probably be better. And not being on the road all the time could be better and all those things. So, but I guess, you know, ultimately, like, how do you guys, like, I know you have different segments of your content, right? You have baseball development. You've got the facility tour side of it. You've got some recruiting stuff. Like, how has that sort of evolved? And is there like a focus, or let me ask it a different way. Who's your target audience? Or maybe there's one for each of those segments of content.
Yeah, I would say there's probably one for each of those segments of content, but they do overlap to a large extent, and we try to be, you know, adaptable for our fans. But really, it's just people that want to learn the game of baseball in an educationally presented way that's not in your face, shoving it down your throat, in a way where we try to make the coaches the storytellers, right? Where Dan or whoever's on camera is the one kind of just guiding through the process rather than inserting himself into the conversation information too frequently, and just allowing, coaches to have the platform that we have to educate listeners, right? And whether that's players who just want to learn from a Division I pitching coach about what they're looking for so they can be better in their, week to week preparation, or whether it's a young coach like Dan and I was, when we were working our desk jobs, we were both, crushing podcasts to no end, taking notes until we rip through the paper. And we're just trying to, help anybody who comes across our content learn something, or if it's a parent that just wants to know more, right? Like, how can I learn from these coaches to help my son or daughter and make the right decisions in their career and advance as much as possible? So it's not exactly one target demographic. It'd probably just be like baseball fans, players, and coaches, but it's definitely one of those that, we just want to make sure we're taking it from the lens of educating the masses rather than, inserting our perspectives and opinions in each of the content pieces we produce.
Okay. That sounds great. I mean, it's very similar to the way I look at the world, right? We talked about this before we hit record, being curious and sort of asking the questions to learn from other people versus telling other people what we think are the right answers, which I think is great. So, like, how has it been received by the coaches you've had the chance to work with and interview through the process? Like, what's their sort of feedback to you guys, or do you get any feedback, or do they just sort of go through the process of interviewing with you and then you move on?
Depends on the coach, right,
Okay.
Trev? I mean, we've certainly had a couple who just go through the process. Now, some of them are extremely busy, and you understand why, and they're gracious enough to give us any time, and we'll take it. But the majority of them, I think we've been very lucky so far, knock on wood here. A lot of them have been very appreciative. We've gotten a ton of positive feedback. We've been really lucky because I think, and I'll even add to Trev's last answer there, like in my mind a little bit, like the target audience question, like me, I'm our target audience, like still to this day. And I think that's what makes me have so much fun doing it, is the fact that, like, it still pinched me to be standing there and like learning from Matt Hobbs, because as Trevor said, like when I was a young coach, I tried to find every word Matt Hobbs ever said publicly and implement it, right? So like the fact that like I'm being able to now ask him questions to learn things, like some of those questions are just simply my curiosity. I just want to know what his thoughts are. Not that I'm probably ever going to be able to implement them again, but it's like, man, when I was a coach, I kind of wondered about this. So I want to know from someone like him how he handles certain things. And so I think because that's our goal, and I think Trevor feels the same way, I think we've been very lucky that like a lot of the feedback we've gotten is positive, and we've been able to build, at least in my mind, some really impactful relationships and, people that I respect so much. I just think it's so cool that, we go in there and we don't, upset them in any way, and they appreciate our work.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'll even build off to the fact that the amount of time we spend on camera compared to off camera with these coaches, Dan and I take pride in spending half of our time building the relationship with the coaches, because now I think there is a director side, is like we try to break down that initial coach speak barrier, which we do a really good job of doing. So by the time we click record, there's a level of comfort between Dan or whoever's interviewing and the coach, so they get a little bit more into the depths of what we're trying to get out of our content piece. But I will say again, we just spend so much time. I mean, we talked off record about Dan Hefner, and we spent 45 minutes to an hour 15, both standing around home plate in the hot Dallas, Texas heat on turf, learning leadership from him and legitimately like asking questions in an earnest way that were like, why do you guys do this? How do you do that? How do you do this? And him being gracious with his time is the only reason we were still able to get 40 minutes on record after the fact there. But we spend so much time trying to pick these coaches' brains and build the relationship outside. Like if we just barged in, stuck a camera, hooked them up with a microphone, clicked record, did our stuff, I don't think our content would be 40 to 50% as good as what it is, because we do take a lot of pride in building those relationships. And then I think coaches appreciate that in the long run. And it's why we've been back to places. It's why we could call a lot of these coaches in the country right now and probably get in their doors within the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. And I think what you said a little bit earlier, Trevor, is, let the coaches tell the story, which I think is so impactful. Right? That idea that we're just asking the questions, they're going to tell us in their own words. And, obviously if you listen to Matt Hobbs talk, there's some element of high level baseball vocabulary where if you have no familiarity with the sport, you might be like, what's he talking about? But if you know anything about baseball, he's able to communicate some very, very central concepts about coaching baseball in a very understandable way, which is really great. In fact, I'll share this with you guys, and I don't know the punchline of this story, but I'm going to guess I do, which is I was on a meeting with one of my baseball players who pitches in college, and we were talking on Sunday night, our regular Sunday night session, and he brought up Matt Hobbs talks about racing to 2 strikes, right? And like I'd heard that from your stuff, and then you literally brought it up, and I'm like, there's no way he didn't hear it, on your content.
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, yeah, he's like, I'm working on racing to 2 strikes, and I'm like, that's awesome, And then like that idea, because this is a kid who struggled with his command, right? So if he can really get good at being fearless in the zone, and feel like it's okay to get pieced up a little bit for the trade-off of, hey, I'm going to be getting ahead more often, even if I take one on the chin every now and then, like you said, like I think Dan, you were saying there about getting like, scarred up, right? Scarred over, scabbed up, right? Like, hey, take some of those hits, bleed a little bit, but now you're like, I'm not worried about losing that. I think that's like that kind of content is just so valuable because it resonates with young players. Like they can get it without it feeling too high level and too like overwhelming or feeling like too like preachy.
Yeah, I mean, it's so crucial. One, that's awesome because if we can help one person, like anytime we get a story like that, or we've had a couple coaches at places we've shown up to who have brought up videos we had done in the past, and it's like that's what we're trying to do. Like that's a win to us. But yeah, like for college pitchers especially, like the racing to 2 strikes, and like hearing Matt Hobbs say that like we set up down the middle in the fall. If you come to a fall game at the University of Arkansas, our catchers aren't gonna move. Like hitting's really hard, and I remember being a college pitcher and the early stages of my career being scared of the strike zone a little bit because these guys are older than you and they're big and strong and they're good, but it's like you have to remember that like so are you. That's why you're there, and like you have to be fearless and understand that okay, if I give up a couple hits, it's not the end of the world. And I think that's like hearing from some of these pitching coaches who can, like you said, translate it and make it so digestible and kind of do it in a motivational way too. It's just so awesome. Like if you love baseball, it gets you fired up. Like Trevor and I will be texting back and forth like about hearing Coach Hobbs say something. We're like, how awesome is that? Like I want to go out there. Trevor texted me the other day. He was like, he makes me want to go out there and chuck 72 up at the plate. Yeah, like just let's go do it.
Yes, he does. But I want to stay there, Dan, what you said. So I'm curious. Like I'm curious about your opinion. Well, for you specifically as a pitcher, was it the jump to college, or do you feel like that's the way you were coached leading up to that point and you had to have it coached out of you?
No, for me, it was certainly internal pressures I put on myself.
Okay.
Just the jump to college and I think we talked about this on our podcast. I don't know if it was before we were recording or during, but like these kids, I was a guy who wore my ERA around like it was tattooed to my forehead.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
So making the jump to college where I'm an undersized 18-year-old and here comes a 22-year-old man, especially in the fall, like some of my teammates, it's like, dude, I have no business being here. And there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome. And I think for a lot of guys, Trevor and I will go watch a college baseball game, and it's a lot of fun because from the stands it's so easy. When you're not in the dugout or on the field, it's the coaching and playing is the easiest thing to do when you're sitting in the stands. So we enjoy it, but like so many times you'll see like we were at a game last weekend and a kid was just dealing and he had like just great stuff that day, and a kid turns on a ball and rips a single to left, and I just look at Trevor and I'm like, yeah, okay. The other dugout's getting all fired up. And I'm like, yeah, great. Now go do that 3 or 4 more times against his stuff. The only way you score here is if he gives you a free pass.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, if you can see, and this kid that was pitching was a senior and he did just go right back in the zone. Like, I don't care. My stuff's too good today. And, those are the guys who are really successful,
yes.
And like, but at the same time, I completely understand the mental hurdle that it is of not being, like you can't be afraid of that. When the kid turns on it and they're swinging from the rafters in the other dugout because they finally got a base hit, you have to be able to like kind of stay within yourself and get right back in the zone. And to me, those are the most badass guys that you see in college baseball? Like, are the ones who get punched in the mouth and spit the blood out and are like, I want more, and just jump right back in the zone. Yeah.
But that's something we talked about when we recorded on your podcast. And I think it is something that's coming up now. We're recording towards the end of February, right? That idea about competing, right? Like, let's go compete. All right, you got me. Like, I'm going to get you versus, I gave up a hit. Now what? Right? That, like, don't give up a walk, or don't give up another hit, or don't throw a wild pitch, or what's going to happen if, like, versus like, okay, you won that one, but you're not going to win the next one. Like, that competitive mindset, I think, I don't know. I don't have enough data, right? Like, we talked about being humble as a coach. Like, I don't know enough to say one way or the other, but I think competitiveness is something that kids nowadays, I'm going to sound like the old man, struggle with to a certain extent. And maybe because it's of social media, maybe because it's because of data, and maybe it's because of, all this other pressure that maybe I certainly didn't have, and maybe even you guys didn't have as much. But do you think that's true, or do you think it's just the nature of the beast of a baseball player who, it's still a very mental game, and like you said, like, your ERA was tattooed on your forehead. Like, maybe it's just confidence is fragile in a game like baseball. I mean, do you think it's trending one way or the other, or do you think it's just like it's always been?
I think the biggest shift in the mental game of baseball was when stats became accessible online, right? Yep. Like, whenever in college baseball that day started, I think is when mental hurdles became a huge obstacle. And then even when Dan and I were in high school, max preps was a thing. And now you have game changer, whatever it is at the youth level, where mom and dad are counting stats, and we're keeping stats from T-ball on. So whenever the day changed that stats became accessible online, I think that became the banner of what made a good player versus a bad player, rather than the holistic nature of being a good teammate, or producing defensively, or running the bases well, or whatever multitude of ways it was to be a good baseball player. The day that stats, like again, Dan and I joke about it all the time, but it's the truest thing in the world. When stats are online and you're at a school and you think you are a baseball player, you go to X college because you're a baseball player, you think you walk into your English 101 class and that pretty girl that you got a crush on, you think she knows that you went 3 for 9 last weekend, or that you hit a bomb in the midweek, or that you let up 8 runs in 3 innings in the mid, like everything in between. You think that everybody in that class knows, and you're literally walking around campus with your stats on your shirt, and everybody can see it. And it's the most absurd thing in the world, but I think it's one of the things that is the hardest for baseball players to break. And then that's not even to mention, on the competitive side, the data and analytics of pitching.
Yeah,
that was post Dan and I's playing career, but obviously coaching career, it was pretty evident. And it was just like, kids would go, like, Dan could speak more, but you'd have guys in indoor sessions in January, and they would get rocked or walk the world, and then come out and ask what their average velo was. And it's like, you sucked. Like, there's no, like, you sucked today. Like, I don't care what your average velo was, you sucked. And then you have your other dudes that are just full of piss and vinegar, and will go out there and compete and throw 82-mile-per-hour sinkers under guys' hands, and with no fear. And it's like, in college baseball, I think specifically, like, guys can really get away with C grade stuff if they have A+ compete and understanding of, like, how to go out there and just really maximize what they are, compared to the guy with A+ stuff but's worried about his vert, velo, how much RPMs he has, if he can do X, Y, and Z that he's able to do in a confined indoor setting in December when his buddies are around.
Right. Oh, so there's a bunch of stuff that I could go with there, but I would take it one step further on what you said about going to class and the people around you not knowing what you're doing. Your teammates don't even give a shit, right? They might know what your stats are, but you think they care, and they don't care. We know what they care about? They care about themselves, right? I talk to kids about this all the time. Like, you think everybody's watching you? Like, it's the spotlight effect. You're not the center of the universe. Yeah, maybe you're struggling now. Maybe someone makes a comment under their breath and they give you a hard time, but really all they're worried about is themselves. So let's just focus on the process, right? Do I believe that what I'm doing is working? And if it's not, let's solve the problem. But if it is, let's keep doing it. Even if the balls aren't dropping, even if, I'm giving up a blooper or an infield hit or whatever, like, let's just stick to the process because it feels good. I'm executing, I'm making the pitches I want to make. And it doesn't matter if it says, I mean, Matt Hobbs said this in one of the things, one of the videos you guys did with him, which was velocity does matter, right? And we don't have to get into that. But at the end of the day, what really matters is getting guys out. Maybe that varies by level, but ultimately the job of a pitcher is to get guys out. So when you have your C stuff on a given day, if you can still get guys out, that's the compete, right? And I think that's the thing that I think with the data, some of the attention goes to the outputs and it gets pulled away from the compete.
Yeah, I think I truly, because this is something that I've brought up a lot recently when we've gone on trips with these coaches, is I think that, and I don't know if I'm qualified to speak on this enough, but I think the compete thing is like a combination of a couple things. One, I do think we have a problem at the youth sports level and even the high school level on how we're teaching compete. Like, so much to me, kids don't know how to compete as much anymore. I will say that, I feel like, and it was even during our day a little bit. Like, I remember being in the middle of some of it, and I think social media plays a factor in that, because so much of it now is like, you see a kid hit a double and it's, the dugout, it's less about, hey, good job, our guy, to your teammate that just hit a double, and it's more at the pitcher, you suck. And I think that's because you see stuff on social media and like we've lost some of that. And I think also some of that comes from like the youth level. We're not teaching kids how to compete properly or what it means, because you could be really competitive and respectful at the same time.
Yes.
Like, it's possible. But you don't go viral for that. And I think so, kids aren't seeing that enough, and we're not teaching it well enough. And then I also think that, to Trev's point and your point a little bit, like the data race, we've lost baseball IQ a little bit for a while there. And I remember being at a minor league game a couple years ago and like watching the product on the minor league field and going, oh, we have a problem here, and this is about to be our next, wave of big league talent. And talking to, because these college coaches are so good, they always are finding, they want to find victories in the margins. And I think they started to see that a little bit, and the pendulum is definitely swinging back to like teaching baseball. And like,
yes.
There was a long stretch of time there where I feel like in our baseball, training, practicing, the youth level especially, like we got so obsessed with the one-on-one showdown of pitcher versus hitter that like we forgot there was a bunch of different aspects of the game, right? Like you can bring value by being a great fielder, base running, and to Trevor's point, like if you have C stuff but know the baseball IQ, know situations, and are control of yourself and know how to compete, right now you're a valuable asset, because they're still like this wave of kids who they were born in kind of a lab in one-on-one cage sessions, and where we're taking a swing and all we're doing is looking up at the hit tracks or the track man or whatever. And it's like there's just so many, so I think we're going to swing back, hopefully, is my hope, where we can blend the two together.
But I think we saw that in the World Series. Like, you watched the Blue Jays do that, right? The Blue Jays were playing competitive baseball. They were taking extra bases. They were hitting the ball behind runners. They were bunting. They were playing baseball the way that, old school, like small ball, but they were playing baseball in a way that was competitive. It wasn't like, I don't care what it looks like, we just want to win. Right. And I think that it does seem like it's starting to swing back at the major league level, where it's like, okay, we overdid it with the analytics. We're teaching everything instructionally through the analytics lens, and we're getting a ton of swing and miss. We're not winning in the playoffs because we're still doing the same things. We're not playing with baseball IQ. So like, what are some of the other, go ahead, Dan. I mean, you can see you.
Sorry, I think what's important is like we can have both. And so long in the baseball community, it's been like you're either team analytics, new school, or your team old school, where like Greg Maddux, no one will ever be Greg Maddux again. And it's like, well, we can be both.
Yes.
Like you can hit the ball out of the ballpark and still know how to field your position and run the bases and still know how to compete. It's just, we have to understand when it is time to be worried about our development and when it is time to worry about our induced vertical break and when it is time to worry about competing. And that's what I think you see. And the coaches that we talk to that are at the top levels understand that and have such a firm grasp on that of, hey, like there is individual development, sessions that we have and times to be focused on all this stuff. And then there's times, now it's time to be a baseball player, go out there, compete, learn the game, learn how to base run, learn how to field your position. It's possible. And I think the coaches at the highest level are getting close to that.
What do you think, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with Dan there more, right? Especially at, we talked to one of the schools that comes to mind is Richmond, and Richmond does about as good of a job as anybody at this, their classroom sessions. And we were flies on the wall in the
Mm-hmm.
fall, in the thick of it. So I'm not going to say that other programs that we've been around don't do this. But Coach Norman and Coach Aoki, they both talked in detail about how important it was to teach the game and go beyond, how they run the bases and how that gets them from 4 runs to 6 or 7 to 10, and how that can be the difference between a conference series win and a conference series lost. And, Coach Norman said one thing too that really stood out to me was like having other teams be exhausted after they're done playing you. And I think that's one of the coolest thing as a coach who was lucky enough to be at a program that made other teams exhausted to coach against you. It's one of those things that I do have a special spot in my heart for. And I think that that's a program that really stood out to me and how they're going about those things. And then again, it's not, I think the big thing and where you see at the top programs, right, is like Arkansas does those things too at a really high level. Coach Hobbs is about, as new school in terms of his mind as it gets, but he's an old school dude in the fact that it's going to be like, here's my best stuff right over the middle of the plate. We're not going to give away free passes. We're going to throw your best pitch as most as possible right down the middle. Right. And it is cool to see that is, like Dan said, a pendulum swinging back. And I think typically it starts at Major League Baseball.
Right.
And once that starts to trickle down. But again, even from the Major League Baseball sense of like, we can't just have 9 of the same guys in the lineup. Even if we know that power and homers are the best way to score runs, if it's 9 guys that can only hit homers and a couple other dudes and all of them strike out, we're not going to be very good, because there's value to a guy to protect that guy, hit around him, put pressure on defenses and things like that, because you are playing an opponent, not just a nameless, faceless computer simulation.
Well, then I guess a good follow-on to that is, and you guys referenced briefly before about Coach Hefner and leadership, right? So like, to me, leadership is connected to that, right? Letting the players know, like, this is the culture, right? We're going to develop when it's time to develop, and we're going to compete when it's time to compete, and we're going to do the little things. If that means you have to sacrifice for the greater good, we're going to do that. But when it's time to develop, we're going to develop you individually. I mean, is that like, can you talk more about that leadership side, or maybe some of the lessons you've learned through your travels?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you see the best ones, the ones that we've been around, I think of Coach Gambino all the time, and I'm happy you said little things, because, we got to be at practice at Penn State this year, and just watching how they went about their practice that day. They were doing kind of like a BP scrimmage quasi, and like, they were teaching a lot that day. And they were really harping on, making sure we knew where cutoff guys were, where the base runners needed to be, where everyone on the field should be to give them an advantage. And I remember we sat down with him the next day to interview him, and I asked him about, it seems like you guys are very, you care about the little things a lot. And he said, yeah, well, I hate that phrase, because they're little until they cost you a game, and then they're not little anymore. And, I think that's what the best leaders do, is you're exactly right. Like, they preach it. Coach Aoki at Richmond, they're in the classroom, and like being able to sit in that classroom was awesome. While they had a session with those guys and what they were going over on video, they weren't going over yesterday's top velos. They weren't going over the furthest hit balls. They were going over base running, and they were getting on guys who, were showing a lack of effort. And it's like, this is how we're going to win. We have to do this, because I think, for a while there, yes, if you were a head coach, I think you could, if you were really good at developing and you could build guys in labs, you had a leg up on everybody. Not anymore, right? Like, everybody's got it. We go to all these programs. We're showcasing them. Look, they're all
doing it, right?
Really good at building pitchers and hitters. Yeah, so now you better figure out another way to win. And I think, Coach Hefner, a great example, like teaching the competitiveness side. I mean, they start, even game days, they start in the classroom, and they'll do just a fun trivia thing, like they'll compete. You'll split the room into 2, or they'll have someone get up in front of the room and they'll do a contest, like, questions about that kid, like who knows their teammate best and stuff, and they compete. And so he's like, we're starting our game days competing, and it's not like we're going to rip your head off type of thing. It's like this, no, we're competing. I want these guys to win, and they're going to have fun doing it. And then as they go from the classroom to the field, he's playing on the video board, the beautiful scoreboard they have and video board at Dallas Baptist. He's playing the guy's sizzle reels up there. So you're walking to the field and you're watching all your highlights, like to build the confidence.
Yeah.
They just went over to compete. Now they're building confidence, and that's the first thing they're doing on a game day. And so, yeah, I think like it is being taught by head coaches, and the best ones are teaching that are the culture they're developing is, finding ways to win in the margins and teaching guys how to compete.
Awesome. So you touched on this before, Dan, and I want to hear from both of you on this, about your own personal experience. But generally speaking, right, one of the things that I experience a lot as a mental performance coach, and I'm very interested in that light, but just in general, is that jump from high school to college. So maybe it's as interviewers, or maybe it's as former coaches, like, what do you think some of the biggest challenges that like freshman baseball players, when they step on campus, deal with in a general sense?
So I'll go, the first two that come to mind is one, the weight room, right? And I will say that high school athletes are more physically developed now than they ever have been, right? And we're talking about in the last 4 years to 10 years, even as you expand out. The high school freshman nowadays is physically more gifted than they've ever been. But there is still the element of a durability that is a 52 plus game season, the durability that is to get through a fall and throw every day. Like, these are the things from a pitching side of things that most high school kids have never done in their life. Is even a light toss day is a 50 to 70 throw day, right? Like, and most of those guys aren't built up for that. So the weight room is kind of the savior for that. The other is, and this is maybe just my personality, is the adjustment to college, right? Like, the biggest thing that's going to ruin most guys freshman year is sitting in their dorm room with a roommate that they hardly know whether they're a teammate or not, whether they're 10 minutes away from home or 10 hours away from home. You are in a dungeon of stress that you've never experienced in your life. And then you have free will on top of that. So the stress and anxiety that comes from that, you also have free will and free access to fraternities and your teammates' alcohol closets and food at your disposal and dessert bars and everything like that. So I think that from the personal standpoint of the adjustment to college, and there's nothing that prepares you for it, right? Unless you go to a boarding school through high school.
Right.
But the reality is there is going to be a moment in your freshman fall at some point where you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to question if you're going to be able to continue to do it and continue to put 2 feet on the floor. But I think those are the two biggest adjustments from a baseball players that either makes or breaks really some guys' careers, but at the very least their freshman seasons.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, I think the second point Trevor just made is something that is very underrated when kids go through the recruiting process, and we don't think about enough. Like, and I personally, I think anyone who says their freshman year is easy, baseball player or regular student, is lying. Like, I just think it's hard.
No,
it is a hard adjustment for every single person who does it, especially if you're going, you're not going to the college down the street from where you grew up, where you can pop in for dinner or laundry or get away from the roommate you barely know, right? Some kids have that luxury. A lot of kids don't, right? And you're, like Trevor said, a dungeon of stress is like the best way I've ever heard it put, actually. Like, it, because it is. And I think that adjustment, and then, factor into that, like the environment that a lot of kids come from before they get into college athletics, right? Like, you are the best player on your high school team, most likely. You know, unless you went to a freakazoid high school where then it's a group of you. And when you're a senior, you are the man on that field, and you feel so comfortable in your skin. You're typically so comfortable with your coaches, whether you like them or not, you still know how to deal with them. Your teammates all either look up to you or your peers. They all think you're, really good, and you're a lot more successful than you're not. And then you go to the bottom of the totem pole with, coaches that, like, you go from a team, at least speaking from our experience, right, Trev? Like, we went from a team, our varsity team had 12 guys on it, right? We come from Delaware. It's really small. We went to a really small high school in Delaware. We had 12 guys on our varsity team. Now you're on a roster of 40, and, like, you're not going to get the attention that you got when you were a senior in high school from your coaches either. So, like, now you have to, you have to sort through that. So, like, even the physical side alone, like, I just think the mental hurdles for college freshmen, and, in my opinion, I think the best college coaches, how they deal with that is they coddle them a little bit and then push them when necessary. And I think it's a hard thing to do, like, knowing when to hit the gas pedal with those guys and when to hit the brakes is, because, like, it's hard. You're getting to know them as a coach when you're seeing them every day, and the freshmen, you have to learn how to, like, what that relationship's going to be like. You're trying to build that trust. And, like, you don't know how they're going to react. Like maybe they didn't sleep last night because they hate their roommate, their high school girlfriend that is now at a different school. They just got in a fight and now they're showing up and oh, you're going to be down his throat and get him to respond. It's a tough thing. And I think that's the hardest thing is like the personal side of things and just what happens to the, the anxieties of being a college freshman.
Yeah. And I literally see that. Right. Girlfriends. I broke up with my girlfriend and my girlfriend's at another school. Like
they never last.
Next to me at 2 o'clock in the morning and I have to be and I'm like, listen, I'm not telling you what to do, but you got to think about what your priorities are. But one of the best things I heard is actually it was in the second episode of my podcast. So 5 years ago now, the person at the time, I think she's still at IMG Academy, but she was like the head of mental performance at IMG Academy. And I asked her about like what she sees as sort of the indicator of success from going from high school to college. And she said resourcefulness. And obviously I asked her what she meant. And she's like kind of knowing where the help is and going to ask for it. Right. So like you said, like in high school, I'm the man. I've been with my coach for 2, 3, 4 years. I know everybody. I know where to go. I know where everything is. I go get it. I'm good. And I go to college and I need help. One, I don't want to ask for it because I don't want to look dumb or weak or not capable, right? Like I don't have a relationship with my coach. What if I ask him for help and he says like, like, this guy can't handle it, whatever. Right. And so then they isolate, right? And then they internalize it. And yeah, maybe they turns out in bad behaviors, eating, drinking, whatever. Maybe their studies are bad, or maybe it's just like anxiety, literally. Like I have those where they go to college and they have anxiety because they don't know where they stand on the roster because they're used to being the man. Now there's 40 guys. I don't know what my role is until the very last minute. Even guys who are like in the spring, they're not getting told till a day or two before whether or not they're traveling. They're going bonkers because all they can think about is, am I going to travel? What does my coach think about me? When am I going to play? And it's like this spiral. And I think they don't know how to handle that for a lot of reasons. And so that's a big part of what I'm doing. I do have a question about the fall specifically for freshmen, because I've heard this from a number of guys that I work with. So I'm curious as to what your take is as former coaches. And maybe this is a Division I thing because all these guys were Division I guys, but I almost get the feeling from the way it's been described to me is that like the fall is sort of like a boot camp. Like, can we see who can handle it? So we're very hands off and we sort of just observe and let them, like, let's see how they handle it versus like, I'm going to try to start coaching them right away. We'll start coaching them when we get to January, when we're on the other side trying to win games. But right now we're sort of just doing this like, top down evaluation and we're not giving much feedback. And I've had players say to me like, oh, they don't tell me, like, they're not coaching me. They're not telling me what I need. I need feedback. They're not giving me feedback. I think some of that's the lab stuff you were talking about, where I think they're just so used to being fed back so much that it's like probably normal, but like they feel like the coaches are almost like icing them out and they don't know kind of, and it again drives them crazy. I mean, what do you think about that idea? It's more like a hypothesis that I've kind of developed based upon what the players tell me.
Yeah, I think at least from the conversations we have more recently, I think coaches want to give those guys the opportunity to compete and have an opportunity to evaluate them without changing too much. I know from my former perspective as a coach, like I almost sat on ideas for too long because I didn't feel like I either had the relationship or B, I had the knowledge of why the kid was doing something specific that I didn't agree with. And I think there is a level of, I don't want to go as far as humility, but at least of understanding of like trying not to insert yourself too much in a player that's probably already feels like he's drinking out of the fire hydrant. Right. So I think that's where, again, being able to have a player in his freshman fall understand that like it's not personal, right? Understanding that the coach is, just because you used to be the superstar and the coach gave you all the attention doesn't mean that this coach doesn't like you, doesn't see you as a future. It's just a different coaching style. It's just a different leadership style. But I think they're really trying to give that leash of just evaluation for the player to kind of prove themselves before they change too much. Because I think, at least in the college game, and I think I can say this for certain. When you tinker with something, you're expecting 3 to 4 weeks to 5 to 6 weeks of regression before the progress. In high school baseball, these kids could change their stance up every time, and they're usually more athletic than the competition they're in. And so a coach could offer them a swing change. You could go to your local hitting coach, and he could completely change your setup on a Wednesday, and then you'd still go 3 for 4 on Friday. If you do that in college baseball, especially at the Division I level, you are going to get eaten alive. And so these coaches want to see what you kind of have in terms of the evaluation time and what your competition is and whether you can turn it on or turn it off against their top level arms before they start putting you in a position where your brain is going to have a lot of fog if they're throwing out all the information and all the advanced stuff that they want you to be doing. It's just about implementing your system, getting to kind of see how the player reacts to it, and then allowing them to kind of settle in before you start making those overarching changes.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Everything Trevor just said, yes. Like so much of what we see too is exactly that. Is I think the relationship piece is huge in that too. Is you don't want to, try and coach a guy too much before you've built the trust. And also, like Trevor just said, you don't want to try and start making changes until, you know what that kid has and what he can do, because those changes sometimes take a long time to go.
Yeah.
And you need to know. A lot of times you need to say, okay, what can this guy be playable right now with what he has? And then you start, like Trevor said, you start banking ideas for what they need to work on. And you also need the sample set, right? Like if you make a change off 1 or 2 weeks worth of, that might not be right. Like you need more data, you need more samples, you need to see his swing hundreds of times before you want to start tinkering, because it can take a while to implement those adjustments. There is probably a hack. Let's see. Trevor, I want to know if you agree with this. There's probably a way to get around that though, because most coaches are all the same, where if you wind them up in the back, they'll just start doing their coach thing. So if you're in a practice setting and you just say, what do you think about that swing? Or what do you think, what does my lower half look like right there? They're going to go, because a lot of times too, you're bringing them that first breadcrumb, which you're telling them, I trust you, I want your help,
yes,
I need you. And not doing it in the office setting too, because the office setting, well, I understand that can be intimidating because you have the desk in between, and like that feels like you're going into your boss's office. But if you're on the practice field and you're both in the, you're in the practice uniform together, and you ask that question and you offer that breadcrumb up, they're going to gobble it up 100% of the time.
But I'm glad I asked that question, because to me, then the way you said it from a coach's perspective makes complete sense to me as a grown up, right? But the other side of it is like with the kids is like they're so used to being told. This is my observation, right? Because I'm in the business of asking questions, and I'll ask a teenager questions, and they're confused when I ask their opinion, or what do you do in this situation to coach yourself through this? And they're like, what do you mean? Right? So they're waiting for the coach to tell them what to do because that's all they've ever had. And you're saying, well, I've got to wait as a coach to build that relationship before I open my mouth. Both sides can be true. And then there's this communication gap, right? So I think what you said about the kid, and I'm on that side almost exclusively, that's what I would say to a kid is like, hey, go have that conversation, right? Whether it's on the field, ask the question for feedback, because that's going to give you what you want, and it's going to give you a little bit of certainty to settle yourself. Or even if you have to go knock on the door, we can prepare for that. But if you're driving yourself crazy because you don't know where you stand, well, then you got two choices. You can keep driving yourself crazy, or you can go knock on the door. Pick which one you want. Right? And there's consequences to both. But like, I think that's like the thing I'm most fascinated by is that relationship building and the communication, because the way an 18-year-old sees it, and then they're coming off of being recruited when they were probably told something really good. And now you get in the door and like you're de-recruited, right? You're like, that's it. Move on. Now you're one of us. Like you got to be a soldier. Like, I think that's really hard for kids because they were told they were so special for a year or 2 or 3. And now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, you just like everybody else, go figure it out. And you're like, what? So, but it is hard. It's like any transition. Like I think about my transition to college. I didn't play college baseball. I went to Michigan State. My college transition was brutal. I had a roommate from California. It was freaking freezing cold. I wasn't an athlete anymore. I played 3 sports in high school. I didn't have baseball or football or basketball anymore. Like that was hard for me. And I wasn't even an athlete. And then you add that layer on. Holy crap. Like that's a lot. Like you got to really be a special kid to handle it. I guess one more question before we start to wrap up, because I think as we've learned in our conversations, we could pretty much go on forever and ever, keep talking. But I think on that point, how much do you think that the portal, for good or bad, not bashing it at all, it gives everybody options. I think it's the way of the world. But how much do you think that influences sort of that dynamic of, well, if I don't think I'm getting what I want right away, I can pick up and go somewhere else?
It's funny because when the portal gets brought up, just I think based on Dan and I's ecosystem, we always lean towards like the coaches aren't that bad in what they're doing and it's a business decision and all those things like that. The players need to stick it up, because so it is funny how like perspective is everything when you bring up the portal, but it goes both ways,
Yeah.
right? And I know obviously that's something that, you know, not everybody wants to hear, but we talked about this in a couple weeks back on a podcast episode, how with the roster sizes decreasing in college baseball, that you have to be valuable like August 15th of your freshman year. Like you have to be ready. And if a coach doesn't see the opportunity for you to make at least some semblance of an impact in the next season, or if you're lucky and you have a ton of potential and you have a ton of, you know, molding that needs to be done your sophomore year, they're going to go find somebody else. I mean, we used to talk about it to our guys, not as a threat, but like we're always recruiting your
Reality.
replacement. We are like, that was our job. That was my job as a recruiting coordinator, was to go find a shortstop that was better than our All-American. Because if we could move our All-American to second base and replace him with a really good player, we'd be a really freaking good team and we'd all be really happy. So I think from like that side of things is players need to understand that like it is more business like than it ever has been. There's no courtesy roster spots. There's no, hey, come and get your seasoning and marinade and you'll be a stud your junior year and making an impact. If you're not ready to make an impact right away, they're going to go find somebody who can and who will in the immediate future, even if it doesn't have the high level ceiling that is there. And then I think the other side is for the players is, you know, a lot of players, they take the easy way out. You know, I think if they get the situation that they don't love their freshman year, they're not getting the TLC that they need, they're not getting the playing time that they think that them and mom and dad think they deserve, I go find somebody else who's going to give it to them. So it's like almost an infinite loop of just replacing yourself in another situation that you feel like you're going to get the necessary TLC that you need, rather than, you know, gritting your teeth and getting through it and finding yourself in a situation where you're competing for a job and earning the right to compete and play at a school after 2 years of being a backup and giving your all to the program. And those kind of stories aren't as common anymore. So I think with the portal, it just gives everybody has a get out of jail free card. And I think that is a good thing, right? And in a semblance of like players have the ability to move if they really had a bad situation, they really made the wrong decision. I would hate to have that player tied in and then have to lose a year of eligibility because he has to stay there. And then for coaches, obviously, if they make the wrong decision from a personnel standpoint, they can go find a player to replace that player. But I do think it limits the ability for people to kind of get through adverse situations and grow into a person. Because like, again, like Dan and I both spent multiple years at a program. You're in your third year at a program. You love that school. You love every inch of that school. You love the people that are in your classes. You've spent 3 years with those people.
Yeah.
You love your teammates. You love your coaches. You meet your coach's kids, your coach's wife. You understand those situations. Like there is a lot of validating experiences in being at a program for 4 years. Some guys are at one program a year, and I just don't ever see them getting the benefits that I felt like I got out of my college career outside of just the baseball element.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch in there because I don't have a view either way. Like I don't pick sides. Like I see it, it's a business transaction, but I think it's that, go back to what I was saying before about why am I going to this school, right? Because if I'm going to the school to get playing time, then maybe I need to sort of recalibrate where I want to go, right? If I want to play, do I go to a JUCO? Do I go to a Division III because I'm going to have a better chance to get on the field because that's the number one priority, versus am I going to be happy? Like if I'm happy at a Division I school and I'm not playing, but I love the coaches, I love the staff, I love the ecosystem, I love the campus, and I'm okay not playing, then that's a good decision, right? Versus, well, I want to go to this place, but I'm not playing. So now like you got to figure out what's most important to you and then make decisions through that lens versus I'm going to go to the best school I can go to. And then I'm surprised when I'm not one of the 34 best guys because everybody's a stud and now I'm going to leave, right? Because I'm with you, like develop. Like I'm the old guy again, like stick it out. Well, let me ask you this question. I'll get off my soapbox because I don't really want to talk as much as I am. Do you think that there's more expectation from first years that they're going to play going in? Like, do you think nowadays when kids walk in, like, do you think they have unrealistic expectations about playing as a freshman? Or do you think it's justified and it's like, hey, they're competitive, they want to compete? Like, I don't know where you guys fall out on that.
I think it's the same as it's been forever. Everybody, you're the star in your high school team. You think you're going to go in there and you're going to play right away and you're going to be the guy right away. And I think that the interesting thing that we're going to run into as roster shrink is you might have to at some schools, like more young guys are probably at some schools, depending on that school's situation, are going to have to play because you're not going to have as deep of a roster anymore. And because the portal's a thing and some schools are going to lose guys to the portal and have to rely on younger talent because maybe they're a mid-major and guys transfer up because they do a really good job of developing. But no, I don't think that guys haven't. I think everyone forever in college athletics, right? Everyone thinks they're going to go be a star as a freshman. It's hard to be in a 17-year-old's ecosystem and tell them they're not. At least if you were in mine, like I was going to be a big leaguer.
Right.
No one was like, hey, man, you're 5'10". No, you're not. Right. Like, and if you did, I would have called you. Right. I would have been like, oh, you just don't believe in me. Right. So I think it's hard to hear that. So I don't think they're unrealistic with it. But in our, like the utopian society that I would create in college athletics is what you were saying. Like you go to the school for the values. I love this coaching staff. I like the campus. I have a major outside of the thing that I care about. I love the college town. And look, I didn't do it right out of high school. And I ended up at a place where I felt that way, where like you could have taken baseball away from me at my second school. I would have been fine with it because I loved the campus. I loved the people that I was there with. Like I loved the college town, and that was great. And in this utopian world where guys were doing that, and then you would hit the transfer portal if you got recruited over, right? If a guy who's younger than you, hey, it's my junior year, this is supposed to be my year. Oh, wait, that sophomore freshman just beat me out. Then you hit the portal. That would be, those are the guys who should go to the portal, right? Because you don't want to spend 4 years riding the bench.
Right.
I get that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, even, I try to put myself in the athlete's shoes, like Dan said, kind of mentioning that he thought he was going to be a big leaguer. Like the same thing to answer your question is like, everybody thinks they're going to be Rock Chalowski or any of the freshman All-American. Like they hear the stories and it's the one story at the top, right? Like, so again, not to get too deep into my story, I know Dan kind of mentioned there, like we both don't want to get too deep into our playing career, but like I went to college as a freshman and didn't play baseball. I walked away from baseball. I thought I was going to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 10 years talking about my journey of how I quit baseball and gave up on it and then came back and found my way into being a freshman, an All-American at a Division I program. Like I was freaking Rudy. Like, and like, it's just so funny to look back at it and like be like that in my shoes now, that's absurd. But when you're the athlete in that scenario, you see the freshman All-American, you think that's you. You see the guy that got drafted from a Division III program. Like we always joked about this. I coached Alex Madera, who obviously is a New Jersey kid and played at Arcadia and went to UNC, had a ton of success, just got picked up in the MLB. Every kid we recruited thought he was the next Alex Madera. There's one of those a year in all of Division III baseball if you're lucky, right? And every kid we recruited thought they were going to come to our school. They're going to be great. They're going to replace Alex at shortstop. Then they're going to go play 2 years at UNC and then they're going to be picked up by the Cubs. And like from our detached perspective, of course, we're like, that's absurd to think, that's a 1%er. But every kid that signs up to play Division III baseball thinks they're going to be the guy that gets drafted, the guy that kicks up to Division I and beyond.
The parents don't help with that either. when I was recruiting at a Division II, and I just have a memory in my head. I'm sorry. When I was recruiting at a Division II program, and I had played at Shepherd University, and I played with Brenton Doyle, who's a 3rd-round pick. He's in the big leagues with the Rockies. And you know, they ask you where you played, and you say Shepherd. I remember a parent being like, "Oh, you played with Brenton Doyle," and it's like, "Oh, your guy's not like no, don't tell your son. No. This is not. Let's not go down this path. That's not who your son is. I'm sorry. Like, that kid was a cyborg. Like, it's one of one." Right.
You'd be shocked at how many parents ask how many professionals have you put into professional baseball? What's the path for my kid to be a professional baseball player at a Division II or Division III school? It's like, we've had 2 of them in the history of our program, right? Like, and they were both unicorns.
Yeah, but I think and I agree with you, right? There's some level of realism that has to come into the process. However, like, if a kid came to me and said, "Hey, I want to be a professional baseball player,"
100%.
Good.
Right,
You say good.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
Good. You're going to work hard.
right, the process.
Do what it takes.
Process. Does the process match the goal?
Right.
Meaning,
Yes.
okay, you want to be a professional? Let's go get it. What do you got to do to be a professional? Can't make excuses. We can't miss a lift. We can't eat junk food. Everything has to be eat, sleep, and breathe baseball 24/7 and do everything right to even have a chance to do that. Are you willing to do that? If the actions don't match that, then it's just a dream. Then it's just everyone's delusional versus, hey, you want that? You're playing college baseball. You can go get it, but you got to drop everything else because that's the only way it's going to happen, right? Especially if you're not Rock Chalowski. I don't know how big he is, but I know he's big and he's athletic and he's really good. You're a normal sized guy. Like, you got to put everything aside and say, I'm willing to fail nonstop every single day to get to where I want to go. And I don't care what happens. I'm going to get there no matter what. Because the guys who keep going are the ones that give themselves a chance. Most people don't keep going. They're gone after the first year. I'm going to transfer,
Exactly right.
This was hard, but I'm going to just keep grinding because I love it so much. And the process matches the goal. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of kids aren't willing to do that, and sometimes it's just unknowingly, they don't understand what it takes. They think they do, but they don't really understand. And that's, it's tough to be the person to tell them that's not it,
And I used to tell everybody this, right? Like, to answer your point, it's funny you say that because Dan and I are throwing the ice bath on somebody's hopes and dreams. I tell every athlete I've ever worked with, I hope you play 20 years in the big leagues. I don't care if they're a Division III guy. I don't care if they're a Division I. I don't care if they're in the SEC. I don't care if it's an 8-year-old. I hope you play 20 years in the big leagues, and I hope you do what's necessary to get there. And I hope your baseball career never ends until you have a swan song where you play your last year out and everybody's celebrating you, giving you gifts at every park you play at, right? But on that last point you made, right? Like, so many people don't understand what it takes. I always tell this story about Alex, and not that Alex needs my, stamp of approval. I still remember to this day, he was out in the fall and he couldn't hit. We're taking BP during a inter-squad day, and I hear somebody yelling at me like I'm freaking his buddy on his team because I stopped hitting fungos because I was trying to help the kid in the cage. Because Alex couldn't take a swing all fall. He wanted 1 billion ground balls because he was convinced he was going to play shortstop at the Division I level. When our team would have no lift, we'd have off from lift in the early spring. I always would go and I'd walk in the afternoon on the treadmill. I go into the weight room and I look over to the left. Guess who's getting after it drenched in sweat? Alex Madera. It's like all of these things. It's like, you want to be that guy. Like, you have to do that stuff when nobody's looking and obsess over it. That kid was obsessed with being a Division I baseball player. And then when the opportunity came, he didn't pass on it and he made the most of it. Right. Like, and most of these kids, they don't understand that. Like, yeah, you have to do uncommon things. And even then, like, this is the craziest thing too, that they don't understand. You have to do uncommon things and it guarantees nothing. It guarantees nothing outside of, like, you could be a solid Division III player and that's it. And you have to be okay with that when you commit to it. Like, are you willing to do this if it just means being a good high school baseball player? You might never get a college opportunity, but you're going to obsess over this. You're going to work your tail off and you're going to put yourself out there to do those things. But you might never accomplish these big league dreams, but you still have to be okay with that. And I think that's the thing is, like, if you told them that, like, I don't know if I want to do those hard things.
Yeah.
But those guys that do make it, like, they're obsessed. It's every single day.
It's such a good point. It's such an important point. And I see this all the time with kids who get injured, right? Like you said, like, okay, so now it's an opportunity to work on something that you wouldn't normally work on because you've got more free time. Are you doing those things? And 99 times out of 100, they're not doing them, which is fine because they're kids. But you can't tell me that you want to play in the ACC or the SEC or get drafted if you're not willing to spend an extra half hour working on whatever, your breathing or, your upper body because your lower body's hurt. Like, you can't tell me you want it and then not do it. And you have the one example where you watched it and that was the kid who got his shot and he took it because he was willing to do whatever it took. Most kids aren't, and that's okay. And that's what I tell them. That's where the mental performance coach, man, it's okay, right? It's okay if you don't do that, but you just need to understand that the consequences are likely to be whatever expectations you set for yourself, they're not going to get met because you're not willing to do the work that's aligned with that. That's all good. If you can square that circle, we're good. It's the best you can do.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. If you don't you don't want to put the work in, there's no shame in not being a professional baseball player. Most people aren't. Right? Like those, it's completely okay, but you have to be okay with it.
Right. Yeah. And
that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the next episode because there's a whole conversation around that. So as we wrap up, the question I normally ask all of my guests is like, what's one piece of advice that you would leave with a listener? But with you guys, I'm going to ask it this way. What's one thing you've learned from your on the trail talking to coaches? Like what's the one thing that stands out from the coaches you've spoken to, the college coaches, that like just kind of rings true for you that you would share, to wrap up?
Mike Gambino said something that probably changed my life for forever. And I remember driving home. How long was that ride, Trev? 5 hours? Something like that from Happy Valley. And I probably, we got stuck in traffic. I probably brought it up to Trevor. He was ready to kick me out of the car. But Mike Gambino told me that his job is to teach 18 to 23-year-olds that they can be both tough and vulnerable at the same time. And that, to me, that unlocked so many different things for me personally, like not even just as a baseball player, but like it's so important for college athletes. It's like, just as a human being able to be tough and vulnerable and what that actually means. To me, that's like the one thing that I'll always like number one, because that to me transcended sports.
I love it. Trev?
Yeah, I would say obviously that's one that stood out to both of us because I think both of us think that's important. And the guys that we coached, we wanted them to understand that we would do the same for them. And that's what we wanted to kind of build up in those guys. But, so I'll go more of like on the leadership side is just like how you treat people. The best coaches we've been around, they're not arrogant. They want to learn from us. They want to hear our backstory. They want to hear how we got into doing what we're doing. They wanted to hear what we've learned from other people. They're awesome to be around. They're people that you would want to go get lunch with, and they treat you like you're $1 million, even if, they might turn around and talk bad behind your back. And just that ability to be humble, right? Yeah. And learn and be leaders of your own life and how they interact with their guys and how their willingness to change and adapt to each individual guy. It's not, you have to be in my program and you have to adjust to me. Those guys, Dan said it earlier, but it's my favorite thing in the world. They're all chameleons. The best chameleon in the world is Matt Hobbs in my mind. The other best one's Dan Hefner. The other best one's Wes Johnson, right? And these guys that just have the ability to connect with people from so many different walks of life and the ability to build a team out of that or a pitching staff out of that is unbelievably impressive. And it takes an open-mindedness. It takes an ability to put yourself in a kid's shoes or a parent's shoes or somebody's situation and not, tell them what they should be, but also just welcome them in and bring them into your situation and empower them to be the best version of themselves. And the best coaches in the country do that. And it's not a cutthroat environment where guys aren't comfortable to be themselves. Each and every one of them care about their guys unconditionally. They care about other people, but there's a humility to it. There's a willingness to work with each individual and be adaptable to what that individual's needs are.
It's freaking awesome. Guys, thanks so much for coming on. If you're still listening at this point, all of the Backside Groundballs Media links will be in the show notes, so you can check it out there. Trev, Dan, thanks so much for coming on, guys. This is awesome. You gave me over an hour. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. A lot of fun.
Could have went for 2.
Probably.
Yeah.
Take care, fellas. There you go.